Hi, everybody. Megan Thompson here with Megan Thompson Coaching, and I just wanted to get in and talk about some of the recent posts that I've been sharing that have led to a fair amount of comments, either parents reaching out to me wanting to know more about why and what they can do to prevent suicidal thoughts and actions in their highly sensitive kid, and before it gets to that point for in their adolescence. And I wanted to speak about that, but also what leads to highly sensitive people struggle and how it stems in childhood. So I want to get to that in just a minute, but first I want to talk about why, what's going on, what we're really talking about. So a lot of parents, when we speak, we will start to understand that one of your biggest fears and the conclusions that you're drawing related to your child's intense meltdowns is that your child will not grow out of it. And recognizing that based on, especially if you've been following me, based on the facts that daily meltdowns is evidence that your child is overwhelmed, is evidence that your child is likely developing some sort of mental health disorder and or likely developing a significant dependency on overwhelm and not able to break a cycle. And so your child will hold it all in until they release and explode. And so there's that cycle of the meltdown that helps them feel a little bit better, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. And so that obviously is compounded by the fact that if you're using punishments or any other sort of parenting that doesn't fit properly with how a highly sensitive child needs to be understood in the world, then it compounds the issue and it perpetuates the cycle of the meltdowns. So I'm not going to get into that today. What we really want to do is talk about what leads to your biggest concerns, which is that your child will not be able to manage their own emotions in an effective way for the long term. So that obviously impacts their ability to become emotionally independent, become financially independent, hold down a job, go to college if you want your child to do that, if you want your child to have that opportunity, if they choose so. And so I really want to talk about what drives sensitive adults towards struggle, where it stems in childhood, and what you can do as a parent to fix it and to avoid that struggle. So again, just referencing some of the posts that I had made earlier this week, 50% of the people who end up in therapy who are struggling significantly with either depression or anxiety or risky behaviors are highly sensitive people. But highly sensitive people make up 20% of the human population. So there's a clear differentiation, a clear disconnect between how highly sensitive people are managing their emotions and how society is understanding them. And that level of invalidation and perception and feeling of being incapable of managing their own emotions leads them to want to seek professional help. Now, I'm not here to say that seeking professional help is not appropriate because, I'm a therapist. So of course we want people to seek therapy when they need it. And it's also true that if you're a parent and you're here, you want your child to grow up without the need to, or without having to develop a mental health disorder, right? I mean, we all want that for our kids. So here's why we're talking about that. Because when we think about what the research says about how highly sensitive children develop in this world today, as society teaches us about emotions in effective or ineffective ways, highly sensitive children have a higher likelihood of developing a mental health disorder and needing to go to therapy. So what we want to do is understand why that is, where that comes from. And so what I want to talk about are the 4 categories of forceful parenting and what that means and why that drives a highly sensitive child to develop an even greater explosive behavior in their adolescence, and then if not in adolescence, then towards adulthood. And so by explosive behavior, I don't necessarily mean that they need to be aggressive or violent, but that their meltdowns perpetuate or continue or start to perpetuate beyond and into adulthood. And that leads to for them to struggle, not being able to hold down their job, not be able to launch. We see a fair amount of highly sensitive people stretching out their need to launch from their parents' household because of the difficulty in managing their big, deep emotions in healthy and effective ways. And so it's important to recognize that I'm not saying that having big, deep emotions is unhealthy. What I am saying is that before adulthood, your child does need to learn how to manage their emotions so that they are not held back in their goals and aspirations, because that just perpetuates the struggle. Shame is perpetuated by comparing yourself to someone else. And if you see your peers, if you're 18, 19, 20, you see your peers being able to land jobs or go to college, and you're not able to do that, then the shame cycle perpetuates. And so it can spiral into depression when you don't feel capable of managing your own emotions, or you don't feel capable of reaching your own goals. Incapability, helplessness leads to depression. So or perception of incapability and experience of helplessness leads to depression, which then leads to hopelessness, which then leads to suicidal thoughts. So we really want to obviously understand this so that you can prevent this for your child. And so I want to understand and help you understand that there are 4 types of forceful parenting. And it's not just what I speak about often, which is, what I've been speaking about specifically over the last week or so, which is corporal punishment. So obviously, grabbing your kid, spanking them, or inflicting physical pain in order to get them to do what you want is forceful. It's aggressive, and it's not effective. But I've spoken about that multiple times, and that's not the focus of today's conversation. What I want to talk about are the other 3. Now, the second one is rejection or shame-based parenting. So when you reject your child, you send them to their room to manage their own emotions, or you send them to time out to get it together before you're willing to talk to them, or you tell them that what they're doing is not effective, and even if you're saying something like, you're not a bad kid, you've just made bad choices, that is rejecting your child. Your child is not able to emotionally separate themselves from their own behavior. And so that type of language is shame-inducing and is shame-based parenting. And so it's important for you to understand that highly sensitive children who have a higher propensity to shame do not respond well to shame-based parenting, because it just spirals them. And so it perpetuates that meltdown cycle. And so they feel like they're not enough, and they experience the need to hide their emotions, and that just leads to explosions. So the next thing that I want to talk about is invalidation. And this might look like suck it up parenting. So it might not necessarily be that you are saying something to your child like, I can't manage it, go handle it by yourself, and we'll talk about it later. But, go to your room and having your child stay in their room until their meltdown is over, and treating it like a behavior that needs to stop. But I also want to talk about the concept and the understanding of invalidation. Now, a lot of parents will not understand the gravity of the situation that an invalidating environment at home can have on a highly sensitive child. Invalidation is saying things like, don't worry, or saying things like, it's going to be okay. That's reassurance, and this is our, human nature to do. So I really want to educate you that focusing on reassurance is actually invalidating, because what it does is it teaches your child that they can't manage their own emotions, and that you know how or know better than what they're experiencing. And when you do that, you're telling your child to not trust their gut, and that is invalidation. You don't understand how you feel. I know how you feel. So you need to feel how I'm telling you how to feel. It's going to be okay. So when we perpetuate, and our go-to parenting strategy is to say things like, it's going to be okay, don't worry, we'll figure this out, but from a place of I know better, and I can help you, and I'm going to give you all the solutions. This is fix-it parenting, like let's solve the problem, and it'll be okay. It is on the same plane as suck it up parenting. Move on. It's not that big of a deal. And let's keep it moving. And so it's important for you to understand that even though your intention might not be as dismissive as suck it up parenting, it is still very invalidating to focus on telling your child that everything's going to be okay, because highly sensitive children don't feel okay inside. And so when that happens, they don't believe you, but what they do believe instead is that you need to feel better, and they take that as I'm a burden to my parent, and so I shouldn't tell my parent what I feel because it's too much for them, they can't handle it. Your child is highly intuitive as a highly sensitive kid, and so they're going to read your discomfort on your face or in your body language. And when that happens, your sensitive kid will start to believe and understand and perceive that you can't help them manage their own emotion because you don't understand it. So it's not necessarily that they feel necessarily physically unsafe with you, but it is very possible that they feel emotionally unsafe. So I really want to get clear about this because there's a fair amount of highly sensitive adult coaches, people who work directly with highly sensitive adults, about their own emotional capacity and managing their own emotional capacity, who teach about the concept of childhood emotional neglect. So I want to dive into that today because childhood emotional neglect, CEN for short, is the frequent invalidation of a child's experience. And so if a parent doesn't understand how deep a child's feelings are, it can be experienced as neglectful. And so when we think about the definition of neglect, it is, I'm not going to acknowledge or address your concerns because I don't think they're needed or because I have something else that's a priority. So at its core, we think of, children who have been victims of neglect, from a, Child Protective Services definition. That's children who are just not fed and who are not taken care of, bathed, clothed appropriately. And what's important to understand is that emotions can be neglected in your home, even if you mean well for your child. And so that's very important to get clear that you need to turn that around and start to validate your child, because if your child is not feeling validated, they will grow up feeling emotionally neglected and start to wonder as adults. And so many of you are highly sensitive adults and are wondering, why your parents didn't quite understand where you were coming from, and you might have stumbled upon that concept of childhood emotional neglect, and it's very possible that it led to a fair amount of light bulbs as to why you invalidate yourself as an adult. And so that's very important to understand that mismatched parenting, as I posted about earlier this week, is a very clear cause of suicidal thoughts in teenagers and adults when they are also biologically sensitive. So the combination of a mismatched parent, which is an invalidating environment, and a sensitive nervous system, biologically sensitive, when those two things collide and your child's not able to learn skills that are appropriate, your child is more likely to develop suicidal behaviors and suicidal thoughts and self-harmful behaviors and other risky behaviors like promiscuity and aggression that perpetuates through adolescence and continues into adulthood for some, if mental health services are not appropriate and or effective at solving that problem. So what we know to be true is that leads to a personality disorder diagnosis that typically falls along the lines of borderline personality disorder. And so watch my video on diagnosis and personality to learn more about that and where highly sensitive people can develop that personality disorder and how it can be much, much more difficult for your child as a highly sensitive child to thrive in the world once they develop the symptoms of a personality like borderline personality disorder. So I want to ensure that we cover all four. The last part of forceful parenting is actually on the other end. And this is enabling. This is the other side of the spectrum when you are trying to, instead of telling your child to suck it up, it's saying, oh, wow, your feelings are so big that you can't tolerate them, and therefore you must get what you want in that moment. Now, as parents, it's our job to understand what our child can and cannot handle in the moment. And so what that means is that our child is going to need us to be their rock and their safety net and understand where to draw effective limits. And so if we are frequently giving in to our child's requests, and again, if you're dealing with daily meltdowns, it's easy, and it's very easy to look at over time how you are giving in just to avoid a meltdown, because at that point you're in survival mode, and so you're triaging your kids' intense emotions, but without any rhyme or reason. And so when that happens, and you figure out and notice that you're starting to enable your child's intense emotions, but you don't know how to balance their sensitivity with setting effective limits, then that breeds resentment. It either breeds resentment in your marriage, if you're married or co-parenting in your co-parenting relationship, or it breeds resentment towards your child. And when those things happen, then you become forceful. So you swing on the other end of the spectrum, and then you say, you know what, get it together. I'm done with this. I'm over it. No more. And then you set limits in a forceful way. And so the pendulum swings. So when we understand those 4 components of forceful parenting and see where you may or may not be sitting in that spectrum, it's important to take action at this point and to understand where you fall and what works. So I would encourage you guys to watch the masterclass, and if you haven't already done so, definitely learn more about what works for parenting highly sensitive kids. There's 5 steps that you need to follow, and it's very clear that there are certain aspects of what we discussed that may or may not apply for your family, but when you look at the big picture, if you're combining many of them, then your child is likely to struggle through adolescence and adulthood. And when that happens, you're going to continue to focus on how to get your child to move on and take responsibility for themselves. But at that point, it will be much harder given how old they are. So I would encourage you to continue to educate yourselves and go ahead and watch that masterclass. And I'll post a link below this video. But if it's something that you've already done and you're focused on changing this now because this is no longer tolerable for you in your household, and you're looking at figuring out how to eliminate daily meltdowns and eliminate that possibility for your child so that your child can thrive in adolescence and thrive in their adulthood, then I would encourage you to book a call. Go ahead to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk. We'll talk about where you're struggling, where you want to go, and what's the best route for you to take, and whether or not I can help you. We'll talk about that if that's relevant, and if it's not, then I'll steer you in the direction of what would be most effective for your family at that time. Okay, all right, have a good day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.